Hello and welcome to the podcast, Enemies from War to Wisdom. This podcast is dedicated to unpacking the often confusing and painful issues that surround human hostilities. In this way, we hope to open the door to greater curiosity, dialogue, and discovery between people who are poised to be enemies, those who are opposed to each other or have been hurt and rejected by each other. Our goal is to help us all enter into the wisdom that prevents chronic conflict from leading to alienation, fragmentation, or war. I'm your host, Eleanor Johnson, a videographer and artist who is the director of Emma Troupe, an experimental theater laboratory in New York City. And I'm here with co-host Pauli Young-Eisendrath. She is an author, speaker, psychologist, and psychoanalyst. While we come to these topics from each our own perspectives, Pauli and I bring insight from our own lifelong dedicated practices of Buddhism that inform everything we do and think. We hope you find our conversation useful and that you will join us again and again. And now the podcast. In today's podcast, we're going to be talking about the difference between aggression and anger, how our passive and active aggression, essentially biological and hardwired through our mammalian brains. What does the limbic system have to do with our sense of outrage and disgust? And what do these things have to do with our morality? Why is anger an essentially human emotion, and how is it useful in conflict with respect? This podcast will set the groundwork for a human dialogue about dangerous conflict without animal reactivity to the triggers of rage. Thank you, Pauli.
Okay, so Eleanor, what I think we really want to establish in this podcast is the difference between anger and aggression. And we've talked about a lot of topics that, sort of interact or approach on these issues. But I want to do a conversation specifically about the difference between anger and aggression, because again, it's like the issues about love and hate. A lot of people really do not understand that there is a big difference between something like rage and being angry. And so let's talk first about what aggression is and where it gets triggered in the human brain or the mammalian brain. It's the same trigger point, which is in the limbic system. Aggression, first of all, is the response to fear or threat. A lot of people don't know that even. So let me just say that again, that aggression is the response to fear or threat. Now, aggression here, it means either fighting back, which is active aggression, which includes any kind of attack on the other person. Could be physical, could be an emotional attack, it could be an attack of angry words like idealistic attack, like your ideals are wrong, you capitalist, right. That's an attack, right, okay?
Right. What we see so much of today.
Yeah, so the aggression, the active aggression is when you actually move out to attack the other. The extreme of active aggression is murder. You kill the other, you wipe the other out. Passive aggression is aggression turned against the self. It removes the self so that the person is passive aggressive might leave the room, might forget, procrastinate, stop speaking, send up the stone wall, go silent. In the extreme, suicide is the extreme passive aggressive act, killing the self. So killing the other, killing the self. Acting actively against the other, acting passively against the self. Those are the extreme reactions of aggression in the face of fear. There is also something just called a freeze reaction, where you just can't do anything. But typically, what you see in most interactions is either the active aggression, criticizing, judging, fighting, or the passive aggression, withholding, stonewalling, procrastinating, or removing yourself. So those two forms of aggression are wired into the amygdala in the limbic brain. So the limbic brain is right behind your eyes. So the frontal cortex is what is in your forehead, kind of right over your eyes. Behind your eyes is this limbic system. There's a lot in the limbic system that is not just the fight or flight reaction, but that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about this little organ called the amygdala, and the fact that the amygdala causes you to react with passive or active aggression when you feel threatened, even if you do not know that you feel threatened. Like an example is given, you may not even see the snake, but something in you sees the snake and you start to run. And so you actually react to this feeling of threat before you have a thought there's a snake. And so in all of our interactions, we are hardwired to react to feelings of threat. Now, I think we touched on this in an earlier show, but because human beings react through their associations, they can be threatened by something that is not threatening. They can be threatened by a tone of voice, by, for example, if your father always scolded you when you didn't tie your shoes right, you can become actually anxious about tying your shoes so that you feel threatened when you start to tie your shoes. And if somebody clears their throat, you could react just to that. So as humans, we're full of these associations that feel threatening, and they can set off the active or passive aggression without us even knowing that we're reacting that way. And then we don't even know it until we've run the other way or until we've made the insult to the other person. So active and passive aggression built into the system, just like the attachment bonds are built in. And we're reactive to things that we associate with being emotionally threatening, even if we don't know that we actually are perceiving them. So, before we perceive anything, everything that we so-called perceive about the so-called world, it all goes through our entire nervous system and comes back to the cortex. That's the way we perceive. So before you even know what you're seeing, you already have a whole bodily feeling about it, and you have reactivity to it.
So you could say that's also somatic, or
it's
the way
somatic, yeah.
Trauma is locked into our system we don't even know that we had that trauma,
that association
yes, that's right,
to
tying the shoes.
Right. That's right.
Or I keep thinking also of memory.
Yes, emotional memories. Yeah. So you're bringing in emotional memory.
Yeah.
We hadn't actually talked about that earlier. Yeah. So the another organ in this limbic system, this brain that's behind your eyes, is something called the hippocampus.
Right.
And it looks a little bit like a seahorse. So the amygdala looks a little like an almond, and the hippocampus looks like a little seahorse. And the hippocampus is the seat of what's called emotional memory. Now, this is very difficult to explain to people, but emotional memories are stored without any configuration, like not an image, not words. It's more like pieces of a puzzle that when they're reassembled, at that moment, you see the boogeyman or whatever. It's like you're walking along and something happens and bang, it becomes something in your mind that is threatening or that is attractive. Emotional memory also has attractiveness possibilities in it. So somebody speaks to you with a certain tone of voice, somebody says a word with a kind of implication, somebody moves their head in a certain way or clears their throat in a certain way. And you can actually, in that moment, perceive that they're being either hostile or threatening or seductive towards you when they don't have that motivation at all. But your emotional memory is assembling it that way. And there's no way to check that out except to talk to the other person about it. You cannot check it out with yourself. Right. Because your own self, your very own internal interactive system is basically saying, this is a fish, and even if it's a bird, you can't get it. So the emotional memories which are buried. And as you said, many of them you won't even know you've had. Like, for example, I see people in therapy that had surgery when they were infants. And they couldn't possibly remember that, but they have reactivity to sound, or they have reactivity to certain kinds of machinery, which probably was the way that they were experiencing monitors that they were up against when they'd had surgery as an infant. So within our limbic system, we have this weird, inaccessible record which doesn't exist. It only exists as a potential for reassembling in the present moment. So
wow.
That means that we can perceive things really, really wrongly. You know, we believe that that's a poisonous remark, but that was somebody clearing their throat. So again, this is another one of these essential human attributes that we do not, particularly when we're feeling threatened, we do not see or hear things as they are. We're very bad eyewitnesses. Yeah. And 80% of the time, when we feel any kind of fear or threat, we remember the situation wrongly.
Right.
We don't remember the components. Right. We don't see it, hear it, smell it, feel it
Yeah.
in the way that it's happening. We assemble all of that ourselves. Frankly, on a bigger level, and this is much more of a Buddhist teaching that I can convey here, but this whole thing of assembling a reality and believing it is what we're doing all the time.
Right.
You know, but where it's really obvious is in regard to emotional memory
Right.
and the triggers for active and passive aggression.
Right. Or how we hold self.
Well, the self is that collection of stuff. That's the interactive aspect.
That's what I'm feeling. I'm just feeling how all these moving parts in terms of, you know, we want solid ground, or we want things to solidify, stabilize, neutralize.
We want things to be safe.
Right.
Hello.
Right.
How could they be safe when you can't even see things accurately?
Right.
You know, so you're always actually putting together a puzzle from parts, from pieces, and you're reacting to the experiences that you're having that someone else may not be having at all.
That's right.
And so the active and passive aggression, though, are big features when people live together over time or when they're in conflict. Yeah. Because as soon as you experience the other person as being a threat, you will try to protect yourself. And the way you will try will be either to fight them or to flee from them. And you actually have to stop yourself sometimes after the fact. Like you see what you're doing and you say, wow, I need to go back there and apologize. Or that really wasn't accurate. I was seeing that through my point of view. And so passive and active aggression actually always produce more passive and active aggression. So if you hit somebody in the face, they're going to hit you back, or they're going to run away.
Or again, that kind of negative force field that matches energy. It attracts. It's like it attracts itself to itself.
Well, it's also threatening. So if somebody insults you, that's threatening to you. So then you're going to either walk away, get out of the argument, or you're going to insult them back. So again, it's basically aggression is not the way you want to proceed if you want to actually have a dialogue. Solve a problem, work with difference. You don't want to proceed with aggression. Similarly, as we said before, you do not want to begin with humiliation. Humiliation is where you point out somebody's faults. You start by pointing out their faults. And so again, we see in the public domain, newspapers, media of all sorts, just a list of faults of what our leaders are doing, or our opponents are doing. That's not a way to proceed for problem solving, because it just evokes rage. So you cannot proceed by saying what others are doing that's wrong.
It's also so poisonous because we've got such serious problems, and that we have resources to how to deal with it, but there's no focus on that because we're in this other kind of game without projecting all of this just negative, just, you know, I mean, humiliation. It's awful.
Many people, I believe, think that they begin. So, I mean, I find this in families, couples, as well as in communities. People think that it's quote unquote fair to begin by telling somebody what they did wrong.
Right.
It's like something like, you did da 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 wrong, or you promised to do da 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 and you didn't do it.
Right.
That is not the way to begin any kind of problem solving.
Yeah.
Because
So again,
it's humiliating, and either that's false about the other person and they're enraged, or it's true and they've been exposed and they're enraged. And so it's not a way to begin. If you really want to begin problem-solving conversation, you start with the common ground. So we're here today because we're all interested in this, And so then you begin with maybe stating what your position is and asking someone else what their position is and trying to be interested. That's that little bit of love coming in, to be interested, to be interested. So active and passive aggression should not be a part of any intimate relationship, and they never lead to any kind of stable problem solving, and they are not a way of dealing with injustice or unfairness. Exactly. They're just not.
You have nowhere to go.
You have nowhere to go, and others will just fight you back, or they'll run away or whatever. Right. It's just not useful. Now, active and passive aggression are useful if there's really a danger. Like, again, if someone has a gun in your face, or someone wants to fight you, or somebody is out to get you, you might have to block that. You might have to fight back, whatever. But that's not a place you begin, and it's certainly not a place that will lead to solutions. Right. So, throughout time, human beings different. So, the other thing is that animals, all of the higher animals, all of the mammals and the animals that we observe. I was going to say the people that we observe as animals. The animals that we think of as being like people, they all do the fight and flight. Yeah. They all have the active and passive aggression. Yeah. But none of them have what we call anger. We never say the dog gets angry with another dog. The dog fights another dog, or the dog flees another dog. The dog doesn't get angry. So there's something about anger right away that's kind of built into our language that we don't notice often, that we don't use it in relation to animals. We don't say that, bull was angry with the cows. We say the bull fought the cows or ran after the cows or whatever. So anger, the Greeks called it the moral emotion. And they pointed out that it involves reflection, that in order to be angry, and really angry, not just fight because you feel threatened, you have to have a sense of what was done wrong or unjustly to you. In other words, you say something like, I am angry because you owed me $20 and you paid me only $10. And that is not a criticism of the other person. It's a statement of why I'm angry. It's not saying you are dishonest. That's aggression. That's an attack. To say you are manipulative, that's an attack on you. But to say you paid me $10, but you owed me $20, as I remember it, and so I'm angry, is a statement about me, my experience. I'm angry because I believe you paid me $10 when you owed me $20. And then the other person can say, oh my goodness,
I didn't realize
I forgot.
That was a $10 bill. Yeah, I thought it was a $20.
That's right. Or the other person can say, you're wrong. You didn't look in your wallet again and see if that really was a 10 or a 20. And so basically anger opens up a reflection on the situation that has been perceived as being unfair or unjust. Anger also sets a boundary. You can say, stop talking to me in that tone. I can't answer you when you talk to me in that tone. Now, the other person might say, what tone? And then you can say, well, I'm hearing, an insulting tone. But again, it's not saying to the other person, you're an asshole. You're speaking to me in a really stupid way. So active and passive aggression, active is you're an asshole. Anger is, I don't want to go on with the conversation until you could speak to me in a tone that sounds more polite or kind. Then you have to talk about that. But
that would be a great training ground again. I mean, it's like to be able to really practice that. We could catch ourselves. Catch ourselves in terms of how we talk. I mean, you're also opening up the field of language.
Yeah.
You're helping us to understand what the meaning behind these words that we use or we take for granted.
And so often
that we don't think deeply about what they really
mean.
What the implication really is.
Because you know that people don't say dogs get angry with each other.
Yeah.
You know that. No, but I've never heard anybody say those dogs got angry with each other. Those dogs fought. Yeah.
I keep having this thing, bear with me on this, but like a kind of boot camp, where you could go and, you train hard to learn these military skills or to become martial arts or meditating, whatever, but to be actually to be able to practice catching yourself in that.
Yeah.
To really, get the yoga of it.
Yeah, that's great. Yoga, I think that's true.
Would be incredible because then you could, could just pick it up and think,
right.
oh, and again, accountability, taking it back in, withdrawing your, and one of the phrases in the Vajrayana, draw all blames into one, which makes people fall off their chair thinking, what on earth does that mean? Mm-hmm. But again, just being able to catch that reactivity.
Well, if you use anger in a way that's useful, you don't need to be aggressive.
It's a creative kind. It's a kind of creativity.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And you can kind of mine it with the other person too. If someone says that they're angry, you can say, "Help me understand why you're angry."
Exactly.
And then you go into it and say, "Well, the person felt this and that and so on, and maybe you're culpable and maybe you're not, but it's not a fight."
Right.
And so anger actually saves us from aggression.
Right.
And aggression is different from anger.
Yes.
Similarly, rage is more on the aggression spectrum, but rage is this agitation which we feel when our faults are exposed to the group, when we feel humiliated. And rage can be explosive. Now, people lump all of this together as anger, and Buddhists do this often. They talk about not being angry, that anger is so destructive. Actually, anger is reflective. It saves us from aggression, which is destructive. If we use anger, we can organize a protest march, we can make a statement, we can write to our congressperson, we can stop the other person from insulting. We can say, stop. It doesn't say anything about the other person. It says, I've reached a boundary. I don't want to do this anymore. Right. That is different from fighting. It's different from being enraged. And it's different from running away. So I think that in really a framework of how we can do conflict with respect, we can use anger as a way of stopping a situation where we feel we're unfairly treated. And then we would open up a dialogue with the other person where there was the possibility of the other person then understanding why we're angry and why we don't want to continue, with this format.
Right.
But it's not insulting. It's not insulting the other person.
So
it's not diminishing the other person.
You allow for the possibility, and I mean, there's so much can happen when the field is open versus when everything closes down and walls come down, and
Well, the walls that are coming down, to be really accurate again, when we feel threatened, and again, knowing that Homo sapiens are full of self-protection, we can feel threatened so easily. There's a tendency when we feel threatened then to use the active or passive aggression. People that are passive aggressive also, when they stonewall, they procrastinate, they withhold, they withdraw. Sometimes they think of themselves as being spiritual. They think that they're never the person who throws the stone.
Right.
But they're the person usually who's not participating, who's not coming forward, who's not saying, yes, I'd like one of those. And so they're not actually using their voice because they're afraid if they use it, they're going to be destructive. But anger gives you the possibility of using your voice without actually being destructive when you need to create a boundary, so you don't have to run away, so you don't have to withhold.
So this is conscious anger that you're talking about.
Well, in a sense, the Greeks defined anger as conscious.
Yeah.
Because they said it's a reflective emotion. It's not just a body response. It takes reflection. So it means essentially, I don't like that. I feel unfairly treated here. I find this to be unjust. But it doesn't say anything about you. So the other is not sort of characterized in a negative way. It's more the self saying, I don't like it. I won't go on with it. I'm angry about this, but not characterizing the other. So you don't say like, I'm angry because you're an asshole. I mean, because that is an aggressive remark, or I'm angry because you're manipulative. No, that's aggression still. I'm angry because I believe you didn't give me back the $20 that I lent you. And so then we find out, did you? You know, you have a chance to say, well, maybe check your wallet. I did. Or, oh, I forgot. Or I thought that was a 20 or whatever, you know. So there's some place to move with anger. And anger actually opens up feedback to the other person, where aggression does not. Even passive aggression. Right. It doesn't open up anything.
Being able to distinguish between that now is again, very, very helpful. And then when you think about in terms of, you know, peacemaking, you know, to be able to have healthy conscious anger can keep moving it in a direction toward a more possible solution for all involved.
Yes, that's right. The solution that everyone can embrace. Yeah.
So, it could be very, I mean, in many ways, Martin Luther King had that in a way. He had conscious anger at times that just woke us up.
Oh, absolutely.
Gandhi had that.
All of the big organizers who have been effective have used their anger. They've used their anger in a way to open up the conversation with all of humanity.
Right.
And I was just reading here the words of Pauli Murray, who's a black and queer Episcopal priest and civil rights activist, who in 1965, at the age of 55, earned a degree from Yale. And in 1945, she wrote, I intend to destroy segregation by positive and embracing methods. When my brothers try to draw a circle to exclude me, I shall draw a larger circle to include them. Where they speak out for the privileges of a puny group, I shall shout for the rights of all mankind. Yes. So, you know, it's like you can use your anger to make a larger circle to fight for the rights of all people, and not just to protect yourself. Right. But active and passive aggression, you really are only going to protect yourself. You're not taking things in a larger circle. You're taking things to protect yourself. Right. And again, to realize that we're very, very motivated to protect ourselves. I think I've said this thousands of times now, even in the podcast.
That's it in many ways too. Like I just feel like, you know, the blinds opening up, and there's real discernment in this.
Yeah.
Very, very important. Wow, Pauli, this is excellent.
And if you can use anger then to actually talk about your own boundaries and talk about the things where you feel unjustly treated, then you don't have to fight and you don't have to run away. Again, it's a matter of trusting yourself.
Right.
If you can speak in that way, and in that way, you also have a freedom to deal with the feeling of being disrespected, but also true injustice. Where there's true injustice, your freedom is to use your anger to fight for justice, but not your aggression to fight other people. Right. Because then that just brings about more the threat.
Yeah. And isn't it also in Buddhism, I think it's an all true, at the heart of all spirituality, where you can have conscious anger toward the condition without having to project it onto the person. Right. You just leave you just keep it away from projecting it onto another human being.
Right, because you recognize we all have these faults. We're all these.
But you don't have to like the condition that is creating destructive activity.
Yeah, you know, it's if you think about it, in order to use this sort of love, which is the ongoing interest in knowing the other accepting and tolerating the other person. In order to use that, you do have to file like a petition for your own rights.
Right.
You have to say
Right.
no. You
Right.
have to say, I don't like that. I'm angry about that. But when you say it in a way that is truly angry, it is not an attack on the other person. And the other person really shouldn't feel threatened by it. You know, they might feel a little bit defensive because you're saying, hey, I don't like this,
Or
and
it
I
activates
see
a
you this way.
vulnerability,
Yeah.
but you can hold your own vulnerability without, again, throwing it back at the other.
It doesn't threaten the other
Yeah,
person.
yeah,
It doesn't call them names. It doesn't reveal their weaknesses. It doesn't take on this idea that you have to get away from them because they're toxic.
Right.
None of that,
Right.
you know. So all of this kind of culture that we're in now, calling other people toxic, calling, saying that you feel unsafe because somebody has said a word that triggered you, all of those kinds of responses are aggressive.
Right.
It's aggressive to say, I feel unsafe because you said this. If, you know...
Or I feel unsafe because of the color of your skin,
Color-
and I don't
color
want
or
you
the-
living next door to me.
Yeah, or I feel unsafe because, now in yoga class, people say, close your eyes if you feel safe to do that.
Oh.
You know, there's, instead of saying close your eyes if you want to, people say close your eyes if you feel safe. Well, how do you know if you feel safe? I think that life is not very safe. And, we need to figure out in any moment how we want to respond to those conditions. But it's not like we always just have to protect ourselves. We can actually rise up to the moment and figure out something. And anger really does allow us to move through complicated conflicts without attacking others.
I think in the work that I did when I was doing all of the earth walks in different parts of the world where there's great suffering and great violence, I found that I just needed to walk the land. There was a healthy creative anger that was forcing me into those emotions so that I could understand, I could really face the enemy. I could look at it within myself, but that I could really meet the emotion rather than just kind of pushing it away or coming up with some kind of conceptual theory that made me feel safe or comfortable, but also still held a righteous anger toward the other who was wrong. There was something that was moving in me that had to do with, I don't know, a deep kind of memory, but I had to feel it in the body. I had to face it. But there was a deep motivation there, and I'm thinking that motivation was like a
Maybe
creative
like anger.
It was something that,
like an anger that people would have done those things,
right? Or you wanted to be able to take it on in such a way that you could help awaken people to the real dangers of being asleep to that kind of aggression, or that kind of hatred, or the righteousness of feeling that that you're doing something noble by humiliating and making somebody less than you.
Well, you asked earlier about people feeling kind of overwhelmed right now by the conditions in North America, I think, and overwhelmed. Can you just tell me what you mean?
I was sensing a kind of, a powerlessness that I was trying to feel into, because I realized that there was like an absence of hope, something that my life has been so shaped by hope and faith and determination, and I don't know where it comes from, but it's always helped me to steady me and keep me moving toward becoming a better person, or a more awakened person, a more enlightened person. But I found that I just sensed that with a lot of the people that I was with, mainly the younger generation, that they don't have ease around a hopeful future, a sense of a hopeful future. And again, I'm dealing with people who are educated and who are capable and have all kinds of resources that, a huge percentage of humanity doesn't have.
Well, America actually has so many resources. Even our poorest people have many more resources than the poor do in other places.
But what is it that allows somebody to have hope?
Well, it struck me when you said that earlier, too. I hadn't thought about this until just now, that the Dalai Lama said that as he travels the world, the people that have the greatest hope and happiness are the poorest people.
Yeah.
Maybe people have too much. I don't know. I mean, if you have so much, both possibilities and expectations, maybe the ordinary kind of interest in a day's encounters isn't enough, that you feel as though you can't actually just be interested in what's arising around you.
It feels like hard work. It's like their attention span has been eradicated. We used to say, was it Andy Warhol who said that, we have 15 minutes of an attention span. We have now 3 minutes of an attention span.
Well, I think he said we had 15 minutes of fame.
Oh, well, he said that too, but he was also
maybe an attention span too, because he did some long movies. But nothing happened.
But he did say that. But he also talked a lot about the attention span being so limited.
Well, it's true. It really, I mean, the thing is, everything about being human is malleable. Not everything, but let's say in the conditions in which we live are not malleable, but our attitude towards those conditions is quite malleable. And so if your attitude is of interest, if you're interested in what is actually happening, then you're always hopeful because you're always engaged.
Right.
And that, I think, is partly a skill that you can have, but it's perhaps also connected, I don't know, towards not having really big desires. I don't know. Because when you say people don't have hope and they're very educated and they have means and so on, well, what are they hoping for?
Well, or maybe they're just, feeling they don't have, maybe the stage they're at is that they have to develop skills to be able to feel more grounded in their own life.
Yeah.
Like right now, they're a little bit overwhelmed in terms of how to deal with the sense of crisis in the world.
Well, that's a sort of to me is interesting.
It's not,
because
they're not turning to the inside.
Because it's not,
they're not
it's
looking
like,
within.
That's right.
They're not the desire for, I would say often, my thing is to kind of get a sense of how to introduce them, say, to spirituality.
So we both have quoted the lines from the Buddha's teaching, the beginning of the Dhammapada, where he says in one way or another, however you get the translation, with your thoughts you make the world.
Exactly.
So if you have the thought, he beat me, he did this to me, he did that to me,
right.
They're doing this, they're doing that.
Right.
The Buddha says those thoughts follow you.
Right.
Like the cart follows the ox.
Right.
You're always unhappy and afraid because you're always generating the thought, this one did this to me, this one did that to me, that one is, if you generate instead, first of all, if you recognize that moment to moment, you're actually making the other. You're not finding the other. You are generating self and other. Right. And so if you're generating an interesting other, tomorrow will be interesting because I'll have an opportunity to meet the mechanic at the garage and we'll talk about the car and we'll find out some things that I don't know right now. That is hope because you're assuming that it's going to be interesting. Right. But if you get to the point where you're just like, well, now those awful people, they're doing this. Now those awful people are doing that. Now they're doing this. That actually, you're making a world that you're miserable in. Right. And that won't go away, Right. So it isn't that the world changes you. It's with your thoughts you change the world. Right. And people, I think, get sort of the wrong angle on that. They think it's that somehow they're going to make a perfect world by having great thoughts. No, that's not it.
Right.
No, it's more that if you actually engage with an interest in the world around you, you will find that it's always hopeful.
Right.
It's always interesting, even when you're dying.
Right.
When you're actually going into dying, that is a very interesting experience if you just stay interested. And of course, what we're talking about in the podcast today is if you truly feel unfairly treated, then you can speak about your anger and how you feel unjustly treated without insulting others.
That's right. So you don't set up the target for the arrow.
Right, exactly, right. Yeah. So that's a good place.
Yes, that's a wonderful place for us.
That's a very good place to end when you don't set up the target for the arrow.
We're all learning again and again, day by day, this awareness. Thank you, Pauli. Thanks so much for listening. And to continue the conversation, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can find past episodes of the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and CastBox. Enemies from War to Wisdom is recorded and produced by Chris Coltrane.